Okay, so now we're getting into some of the fun stuff. So you're saying, okay, Stephen, I'm sold. I understand the benefits of the subsidized housing model, how it provides stability and a consistent cash flow even through tough markets in my portfolio. Now you're thinking, I either want to acquire or develop, or the third option is I already have a portfolio and I'm going to incorporate the subsidized housing model into my existing portfolio. About acquisitions. Let's say you are so sold on this model that you want to actually build a portfolio utilizing the government stability for the subsidized housing model. So how do you pick deals that would best fit this need? And it may seem obvious just to me, but quite frankly, where you start is you find the market that has the need. So you got to find the customers. The customers are going to be the tenants who are receiving the subsidies, who need housing. And now you're going to find deals in those markets, in those areas that have a support for that need. So we're in Los Angeles. We're in Los Angeles County, and the city of Los Angeles absolutely has a need and a shortage of housing. I forget the number, but it's something close to 4 million rental units that are needed, or units that are needed. That may be very conservative. So in our market in Los Angeles, and even the surrounding cities of Los Angeles, all the way to Santa Monica, all the way south down to San Pedro, and certainly headed north all the way up to the Antelope Valley, there is a massive shortage of affordable housing, and the subsidized housing model would work anywhere throughout Los Angeles. Unfortunately, we have the dubious distinction of being the homeless capital of the nation, and so anywhere within Los Angeles County, the subsidized housing model would work. I think one other way to look at it is you certainly would not want to attempt to implement the subsidized housing model or acquire properties for the purposes of operating the subsidized housing model in areas that do not either need it or are just not friendly to it at all. So I certainly would not say that investing in an apartment building for the specific intent of utilizing housing subsidies in, let's say, the heart of Beverly Hills would be a good idea. Obviously, that's a very extreme example, but number one, there is a need. I guess the argument is that there is a need there. However, it's not going to be conducive for the environment. There's going to be all kinds of ridiculous political pushback. The neighborhood is going to push back. It's just not a good business plan. It's sustainable. It's going to be very difficult. As a matter of fact, we've seen instances where an established, let's say, faith-based organization decided to partner with a developer of affordable housing to build shelters and or temporary housing facilities in more affluent parts of Los Angeles, and faced massive political and neighborhood pushback. And so while I do promote the merit of that activity, this course and this introduction is more for the everyday user, someone who wants to be able to cash flow a real estate deal, but also have some good impact in the community, and it's just not effective time-wise and effort-wise to attempt that. So in our community, it's a little bit easier to or not to do it. But if I were in rural Arkansas, I probably wouldn't go with the plan of trying to acquire a property for the purposes of subsidized housing. But one thing I will definitely say, a big component is you have to know what resources are there, because again, the folks who are receiving the housing subsidy, who you're going to, they need to have the organizations in place near where you're going to invest. Because let's not forget, I mentioned, you have to have your nonprofit and government partners. You cannot do this alone. If you purchase an apartment building, let's say, for the purposes of housing and renting to people who have a subsidy in place, but there are no social services organizations or resources for those people to utilize, you, the developer, owner, landlord, are going to become the social worker. And everyone should do what they specialize in. So, the number one thing first is the need, obviously. Are there people in the community, in the market, where I'm looking for real estate for the purposes of running subsidized housing? Is there a community that needs that housing? But the second most important thing, and they're almost at the same level as far as importance goes, is the resources. If you enter a market and notice that there's a huge homeless population or a lack of affordable housing, and you think to yourself, well, I'm going to just invest in deals, rental deals, and we're going to Section 8 or we're going to whatever subsidies, you better first know that, number one, that the population that are going to be applying to rent that deal have the subsidies in place, and two, that there's a strong community organization to manage the subsidy and provide resources to that community. Otherwise, you're going to be left with, it's one of those, it's like the saying goes, it's not if, it's when things go wrong. And it's everything under the sky, from social to economical. It's everything. You can't predict it. It's challenging with regular market rate renters who are employed and paying their own rent. But when your plan is to utilize government subsidized housing, there has to be the government organizations and the nonprofit organizations managing it purely from an administrative standpoint, but also the social aspect. For instance, not too far from us is San Bernardino County. And we had a client who invested in a very large development that was specifically for a very specific demographic, which was affordable, low-income seniors. So that's already three filters right there that filter out 90% of the population that could rent that property, but they went into it knowing that they were doing an affordable play. They just did not fully yet understand, until they started working with us, what it meant to operate the subsidized housing model. Because their play was going to be, well, we're going to go with Section 8, okay? What happens when the government overspends and has to cut back on Section 8 vouchers and they just don't exist? Perfect. Our firm will help you with employing the subsidized housing model, which is all the other housing subsidies outside of Section 8. Section 8 is fantastic, but it goes through ebbs and flows like anything else. You want to be able to pivot back and forth. Okay, fantastic. We're now going to pivot to the subsidized housing model. However, in that county, there are very few organizations operating subsidized housing, managing them and distributing them. There's a need for sure. There's a huge need for that housing. There just aren't resources. So, really good example, a major county not too far from Los Angeles County will have high need because everything is kind of a little bit cheaper over there. So obviously the lower income community is more dense in that county. But sadly, there just aren't as many resources from the government or nonprofit operators of housing support in that county. I think if I had to guess, it was a tenth of what exists in Los Angeles County. So as you enter a market, as you examine a market and you're thinking about acquiring properties and operating the subsidized housing model, we have to first make sure that it is supported by the resources. So oftentimes our clients who are developers and investors will ask us to help them acquire in markets that support it. So we have to have the three elements: need, readily available resources, and then of course the conditions have to be correct with the deals themselves. If it's still way overpriced, you can have the first two and minus the third, that's not going to work. And vice versa, you have to have the trinity, all three. So that's something that we've helped a lot of clients with, even out of state, looking at different markets that have high available support mechanisms in place. Because when the tenant has an issue, because if you acquire in a market that has high need, you're going to fill your doors fast, for sure. That's not going to be a problem. Filling the asset is not a problem. But when there is an issue with payment, missing payments, administrative, not even the tenant's fault, if there is not an organization that helped you in the first place that you can quickly go to for administrative problems like payment issues, wrong address, whoopsies where a worker either forgot to do their job and didn't cut your check, or quit, oftentimes they quit, then you're in trouble. And what happens if the tenant themselves, one issue we come across all the time, depending on the subsidy, there are compliance regulations or compliance for the tenant must report or be in communication with the agency administering or issuing the subsidy to that tenant. If the tenant has a major medical issue or any other social issue that prevents them from participating or meeting deadlines, they can easily be dropped from the program that is supporting their subsidy. And as an operator of the subsidized housing model, to an extent, you have to be cognizant of that. So the resource on the subsidy level, on the government and the operator of the subsidy, the nonprofit, you need to have somebody who can pick up the other phone and help that tenant navigate that issue. If they're completely on an island on their own, you and them are on your own. So I cannot stress enough the importance of finding a market that supports the need, the availability of resources, and then deals that make sense financially, because again, they don't need to be luxury deals. They just need to be livable, nice.